There comes a moment in every person's life when the real battle is not happening outside, it's happening in the mind. You wake up, and before your feet touch the floor, your thoughts have already started building stories. Fear, doubt, regret, worry, criticism. Nothing around you has changed, yet somehow your entire world feels heavier. This is the silent war most people never talk about, not because it's rare, but because almost everyone is fighting it alone. But here's the truth. Your thoughts are not the enemy. Your lack of understanding is. The mind creates storms because that's what an untrained mind does. The suffering comes not from the thoughts themselves, but from believing them. This script is not about escaping your mind or controlling your mind. It's about seeing the nature of your mind so clearly that its attacks lose their power. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by your own thoughts, if you've ever felt like your mind turns against you at the worst possible moments, then stay here. Because what you're about to learn is the difference between a life ruled by mental storms and a life anchored in unshakable awareness. 1. When the mind turns against you. When the mind attacks you, it never warns you. It doesn't knock. It doesn't ask permission. It rises like a storm, sudden, intense, convincing. One moment you're fine, the next you're locked inside a cage built entirely by your own thoughts. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Nothing outside changed. Only your mind did. This is what makes mental suffering so confusing for most people. The external world stays the same, yet the inner world collapses instantly. A single thought can flip your entire mood because you take it as a fact instead of seeing it as a temporary appearance. People think happiness means having a perfectly calm mind every day, as if the mind should behave like a still lake with no ripples. That belief is unrealistic and, in Buddhist terms, completely misguided. The mind was never designed to stay quiet. It moves, it shifts, it reacts to old memories, fears, expectations, and habits. Storms are part of its nature. Trying to eliminate them is like trying to stop the wind with your hands, impossible and exhausting. A Buddhist doesn't chase a mind without storms. A Buddhist learns to stop believing the storms are a personal failure. The storm is just the storm. It comes, it goes. It has no intention and no inherent meaning. The real suffering begins when you take the storm personally. When you assume the presence of turbulence means something is wrong with you, or wrong with your life, or wrong with your future. That is the illusion. Training the mind doesn't mean forcing it to behave. It means learning to see clearly what is happening without being swept away by it. You notice the rising emotion. You notice the tightness in the chest. You notice the rapid thoughts. But instead of drowning in them, you step back and observe. You understand. This is simply the mind doing what the mind does. And that shift, that simple distance, is the beginning of real freedom. 2. The mistake that gives thoughts power. Your thoughts attack you because you believe them, not because they're true, not because they hold any real authority, and not because they have an accurate understanding of your life. They attack you because you never learned to see them for what they really are. Temporary events arising within the mind, not permanent truths about who you are. This is one of the most fundamental misunderstandings that creates suffering. People assume that if a thought feels intense, it must be meaningful. If it feels sharp, it must be important. If it returns again and again, it must be real. But the Buddhist perspective cuts straight through this illusion. The mind produces thoughts the same way the body produces breath. It is a continuous, automatic process, not a divine message. Most people never examine the nature of thinking. They take every thought personally. When the mind says, "You're not good enough," they feel attacked. When the mind says, "Everything will go wrong," they feel doomed. When the mind says, "You will always struggle," they believe they've met the truth. But in reality, the mind isn't offering wisdom. It's recycling old patterns, old fears, old conditioning. Whatever your mind has stored, especially from childhood, trauma, repetition, or negative environments, becomes the material it throws back at you. The mind is not a wise teacher, it's a storyteller using whatever raw material it has collected. And most of that material is outdated, distorted, and incomplete. A thought is just a mental event. It has no weight, no substance, no power on its own. It gains power only when you grab onto it, when you add meaning to it, when you believe it, when you think, "This thought says something about me." That moment of identification is where the suffering begins. The thought itself is simple. The story you attach to it is the problem. Take a simple example. A thought appears saying, "I'm failing." That's it. Just a phrase floating through the mind. If you see it as just a phrase, it passes. It dissolves. But if you cling to it, you begin building walls around it. Why am I failing? What will people think? What does this mean for my future? Why can't I get my life right? Suddenly, a single thought expands into an entire emotional disaster inside your head. Not because the thought was accurate, but because you amplified it through belief and fear. This is why Buddhism emphasizes not believing everything the mind produces. The mind is conditioned by causes and conditions. You can't expect perfect clarity from a mind influenced by past pain, insecurity, habits, or fear. You wouldn't trust a frightened person to give you guidance, yet you trust your frightened thoughts as if they are absolute truth. That's the mistake. Buddhist practice asks you to step back and observe the thought instead of reacting to it. When a painful thought arises, the practice is to say, "This is a thought," nothing more. You observe it like you would observe a sound in the distance. It appears, it vibrates for a moment, it fades. No story, no attachment, no judgment. You see the thought the way you'd see a cloud drifting across the sky. Present for a moment, then gone. When you experience thoughts this way, the power imbalance disappears. You are no longer the victim of your mind, you are the observer of it. Another mistake people make is assuming that the intensity of a thought makes it meaningful. But intensity isn't truth. Intensity is just a reflection of emotional memory. When the mind replays an old wound, it often arrives with strong emotion because the original memory was painful, not because the thought is relevant today. Your mind may be showing you something from years ago, using the same emotional tone it had back then. But the mind doesn't tell you it's recycling history. It presents the thought as if it belongs to the present moment. And without awareness, you fall for it every time. There's also the issue of repetition. People assume that if a thought returns again and again, it must contain truth. But repetition simply reflects habit. The mind revisits patterns it knows well, just like a river follows the same path it carved long ago. If you've spent years feeding certain fears, the mind will continue producing thoughts that align with those fears. Not because they're right, but because they're familiar. This is why Buddhist training begins with understanding the impermanence and emptiness of thoughts. Impermanence means every thought arises and dissolves. It cannot stay. It is not permanent. Emptiness means the thought has no fixed identity or built-in truth. Its meaning comes only from the interpretation you give it. When you understand both, a thought loses its ability to frighten you. You see it clearly. You recognize it for what it is, a mental ripple, not reality. Understanding this isn't meant to make you passive. It's meant to make you conscious. When a painful thought appears, you learn to ask, is this true? Or is this conditioning? Is this wisdom? Or is this fear speaking? Is this a fact? Or just a habit rising again? These simple questions break the automatic chain of identification. The moment you stop believing every thought, something shifts inside you. You discover a space, a small but powerful distance between awareness and thought. That space is where freedom begins. In that space, you realize the thought has no authority unless you give it authority. You realize the thought is not you, it's just something happening inside you. And when you truly understand this, deeply and experientially, the mind loses its power to attack you. It may still produce painful thoughts, but those thoughts pass through you like shadows. They appear, they fade, and they leave no wound behind. That is the beginning of liberation. 3. The sky and the clouds. In Buddhism, the mind is compared to the sky, vast, open, spacious, untouched, while thoughts are compared to clouds drifting across it. This isn't poetic decoration, it's a practical way of understanding how the mind actually works. The sky is always there. It doesn't disappear when clouds appear, and it doesn't break apart when storms form. It remains open, clear, unchanged. The clouds, on the other hand, are temporary. They arise, they move, they transform, they pass. Even the darkest storm cloud cannot damage the sky behind it. Likewise, even the most terrifying, painful, or intrusive thought cannot damage the awareness behind it. The suffering begins when you forget the sky and fixate on the cloud. When a negative thought appears, you zoom into it so tightly that it fills your entire mental space. You forget it's just one moment, one appearance, one formation in the mind. It feels like everything. It feels like the whole truth. That narrow focus blinds you to the bigger perspective, the awareness in which the thought is occurring. Every thought, no matter how heavy, arises and vanishes. This is the natural law of impermanence. But when you cling to a thought, when you replay it, analyze it, react to it, fight it, or believe it, you turn a passing cloud into a permanent storm. The thought may have been scheduled to dissolve in a few seconds, but your attachment keeps it alive for hours or days. Without awareness, you become the fuel that keeps the storm going. A thought by itself has no power. It's like a cloud, appearance without substance. A cloud can look like a mountain, but it weighs nothing compared to the real thing. In the same way, a thought can look like a truth, but it contains no inherent reality. Yet when you identify with it, this is my thought, this is about me, this defines me, the illusion becomes convincing. Identification is the glue. Without identification, the thought passes. With identification, the thought becomes a prison. This is why meditation isn't about creating a blank mind. It's about realizing that the blank sky is already there. You're not trying to stop clouds from forming. You're learning to stop being fooled by them. Most people approach meditation like it's a battle. I need to silence my thoughts. I need to stop overthinking. But a Buddhist practitioner knows that silence isn't the goal. Freedom is. A silent mind without understanding is useless. A noisy mind with deep understanding is already on the path to liberation. Look honestly at your own experience. How many times has the mind created a terrifying scenario that never happened? How many times has it produced shame, fear, regret, insecurity, only for the feeling to dissolve later while leaving no trace of truth behind? The mind produces clouds of all shapes: memories, fantasies, worries, judgments, opinions, assumptions. And just like clouds, none of them stay. None of them have lasting power unless you choose to hold them. Even a thought that feels crushing today might feel laughably irrelevant next month. The thought didn't change. Your attachment to it did. This alone proves something important. The power of the thought was never in the thought. It was in your relationship to it. When you start observing your thoughts like clouds, something fundamental shifts. Instead of, "I am anxious," you see, "Anxiety is arising." Instead of, "I am failing," you see, "A thought about failure is appearing." Instead of, "I am broken," you see, "A painful memory is passing through the mind." This shift from identity to observation is one of the most powerful transformations in Buddhist practice. It breaks the illusion that the thoughts define you. Think of a stormy sky. Even during the strongest thunderstorm, the sky above the clouds remains untouched. The thunder is loud, the lightning is bright, the winds are violent, but above that layer, there is always stillness. The storm does not affect the sky. It only occupies space temporarily. The same is true of your mind. You may feel overwhelmed, anxious, or attacked, but beneath that emotional storm is the quiet clarity of awareness, steady, unbroken, untouched. When you recognize this, you stop panicking when thoughts appear. You stop reacting as if every cloud is a threat. A dark thought doesn't mean you're doomed. An intrusive thought doesn't mean you're losing control. A repetitive thought doesn't mean you're failing. It simply means the mind is generating clouds, as it always has and always will. Clouds don't need your permission to form, and thoughts don't need your consent to arise. But you don't need to attach to them. You don't need to chase them. You don't need to fight them. The clouds will move on their own. The thoughts will dissolve on their own. The moment you let go, they lose power. Freedom is not in controlling the clouds, it's in remembering the sky. This is why awareness is the heart of Buddhist training. Awareness doesn't stop thoughts. It simply makes them harmless. When you stay connected to awareness, every thought becomes lighter. You see it clearly. You don't mistake it for truth. You don't confuse it with your identity. You don't hand it the power to decide your emotional state. You watch it rise, you watch it fall, and you stay rooted in the space beneath it. Once this becomes second nature, the mind's attacks become weaker. The storms may still come, but they don't take you with them. You learn to stay grounded in the sky, open, calm, steady, while the clouds come and go as they always do. That is the deeper meaning of freedom from suffering, not the end of clouds, but the end of mistaking clouds for the sky. 4. Stop fighting the mind. When your thoughts attack you, the worst thing you can do is fight them. Most people don't realize this. They panic the moment a difficult thought appears, and their first instinct is to resist it, push it away, argue with it, drown it with distraction, or pretend it isn't there. But fighting a thought is the same as feeding it. You're giving it energy. You're treating it as a threat. You're turning something temporary into something powerful. This is why so many people feel trapped inside their own heads, not because the thought is strong, but because their resistance is intense. When you push against a thought, you create tension. When you argue with it, you reinforce it. When you tell yourself, "I must not think this," you mark it as dangerous. The mind interprets that as instruction to keep bringing it back. This is why certain thoughts repeat. It's not because the thought contains truth. It's because your resistance has turned it into a cycle. Buddhism teaches something radically different. Do not fight the mind. Fighting is just another form of attachment. It means you've already taken the thought personally. You've already decided it says something about you. You've already bought the idea that the thought has meaning. The moment you react, you've lost the distance that awareness gives you. You've become tangled in the story. Instead, observe the thought with clarity and neutrality. Ah, here is a thought arising. That simple recognition breaks the spell. You are no longer inside the thought. You are looking at the thought. This shift is everything. Observation creates space. Space allows the thought to pass naturally. When you stop resisting, the thought has nothing to push against. It collapses through lack of energy. Imagine someone shouting in an empty room. If no one responds, the shouting becomes meaningless. It eventually dies out. But if someone engages, argues, shouts back, the noise grows louder. Your mind behaves the same way. Difficult thoughts shout for your attention. If you ignore them with awareness, not suppression, but observation, the shouting stops. If you engage, the noise multiplies. This doesn't mean you should stuff thoughts down or pretend they don't exist. That's repression, not awareness. Repression just buries the thought so it can return later with even more force. Awareness means you allow the thought to be there without reacting to it. You see it clearly, you feel the emotion it brings, you acknowledge its presence, and then you let it pass. No fight, no fear, no story. The moment you stop giving thoughts emotional importance, they lose their grip. This is why Buddhist masters repeat the same principle. Let it arise. Let it fall. Not fight it, not fix it. Simply watch. This is the training. The mind produces thoughts automatically. Your job is not to control the production. It is to control your relationship with what arises. Think of it like sitting by a river. Thoughts are like leaves drifting downstream. If you reach out to grab them, you get pulled into the water. If you chase them, you lose your footing. But if you sit still, letting each leaf pass, one after another, none of them disturb you. Fighting is grabbing. Observing is letting go. Most people live their entire lives grabbing every leaf, convinced that each one is important. But the Buddhist path reveals something much simpler. The leaf was never the problem. The grabbing was the problem. Understanding this changes everything. When a painful or frightening thought appears, you don't panic. You don't tighten your body. You don't start asking, why am I thinking this? What does it mean? What's wrong with me? You simply notice a thought is arising. That recognition turns an emotionally charged moment into a moment of clarity. It removes the personal sting. It disconnects the thought from your identity. The truth is, thoughts don't need you to do anything about them. They dissolve naturally on their own. The mind is constantly renewing itself. No thought has a permanent home. But when you fight a thought, you freeze it in place. You keep it alive through resistance. Awareness is not passive, it's powerful. It is the ability to remain steady while the mind moves. It is the ability to allow everything without collapsing into anything. It is the ability to stay grounded while thoughts come and go like weather patterns. Fighting thoughts is exhausting. Observing them is liberating. Once you learn this, you stop giving thoughts the authority to ruin your peace. You understand that the mind is not attacking you, it is simply producing clouds. The storm feels violent only when you're standing inside it. When you take a step back and observe, the storm loses its edge. You become the sky again, wide, open, untouched. And here's the final essential point. The moment you stop fighting your thoughts, you send a new message to your mind. You are not my enemy. This softens the inner war. The mind starts to settle naturally. It doesn't need to be forced. A mind that is not resisted becomes quiet on its own. Not perfectly silent, but peaceful. Not empty of thoughts, but free from the suffering thoughts create. 5. Why the mind attacks. Your mind doesn't attack you because it hates you. It doesn't attack you because you're weak, broken, or failing. The mind attacks because it is conditioned, shaped by every experience you've had, every fear you repeated, every belief you absorbed, every memory you never processed, every environment you stayed in for too long. The mind is not a perfect instrument of truth. It is a mirror of conditioning. Whatever you feed it, it reflects back. Whatever you rehearse, it repeats. Whatever emotional patterns you've lived through, it will recreate internally, even if those patterns no longer serve your life today. This is the uncomfortable part most people don't want to accept. The mind is not attacking you intentionally. It is simply running old programs. If your early life was filled with fear, the mind learned fear. If you grew up being criticized, the mind learned self-criticism. If you lived around anxious people, the mind absorbed anxiety. If you were taught to expect the worst, the mind developed the habit of imagining the worst. Nothing the mind does happens randomly. Every pattern has a cause. Buddhism teaches that the mind is a collection of habits, deeply layered, continuously reinforced, and often unconscious. Thoughts don't appear out of thin air. They arise from seeds planted long ago. The things you avoided, the emotions you suppressed, the words spoken to you, the situations you endured, the stories you repeated in your head. When these seeds remain unexamined, they sprout automatically. That's why the same fears appear again and again. They are not messages from the future, they are echoes from the past. When a painful thought arises, most people respond with confusion or self-blame. They think, why am I like this? Why can't I stop thinking this way? What's wrong with me? But from a Buddhist lens, nothing is wrong. The mind is simply behaving according to its training. You can't expect a mind shaped by fear to produce courage overnight. You can't expect a mind conditioned by self-doubt to instantly generate confidence. You can't expect a mind used to overthinking to give you silence on command. The mind reflects your history, not your intentions. This is why the Buddha emphasized understanding, not judgment. If your mind brings you old pain, it's because that pain still exists in your system. If it brings you fear, it's because fear has been practiced many times. If it brings you insecurity, it's because insecurity is familiar. The mind isn't trying to harm you, it's replaying what it knows. That repetition feels like attack because you're conscious of it now in a way you might not have been before. When you become aware of your patterns, they feel louder, but that's not the mind getting worse. That's the beginning of insight. Understanding your mind's conditioning does something crucial. It removes shame. When you see that your mental patterns were shaped by years of experience, you stop blaming yourself. You stop thinking, I should be stronger, or I should be past this by now, or why can't I control my thoughts? You realize the truth. These patterns were built through repetition, emotional memory, and survival responses. They weren't chosen, and they weren't consciously designed. The mind was simply doing what it believed would protect you. But here's where the Buddhist path becomes liberating. Conditioning can change. That is the entire foundation of mental training. You might not be able to control the first thought that arises, the conditioned one, but you absolutely can control your relationship to it. You can learn to recognize it. You can stop feeding it. You can choose not to obey it. You can train new patterns to slowly replace the old ones. Just as the mind was conditioned into fear, it can be conditioned into clarity. Just as it was conditioned into self-doubt, it can be conditioned into wisdom. If your mind attacks you with harsh thoughts, understand that those harsh thoughts came from somewhere. Maybe from people who spoke to you with cruelty. Maybe from environments where you weren't allowed to feel safe. Maybe from years of internalizing messages that weren't yours. Your mind may still be echoing those voices, but awareness gives you the power to say, this is conditioning, not truth. With that recognition, you loosen the grip the thought has on you. Even trauma leaves mental imprints that the mind replays in its attempt to understand or predict danger. This makes the mind hyper-vigilant. It scans for threats, creates scenarios, imagines worst-case outcomes, not because it wants to ruin your peace, but because it thinks it's protecting you. A mind that has been hurt learns to anticipate hurt. A mind that has been overwhelmed learns to prepare for overwhelm. These thoughts feel like attacks, but they are actually the mind's desperate attempt to keep you safe based on outdated information. This is why Buddhist wisdom emphasizes compassion toward your own mind. Not indulgence, not self-pity, compassion. The same way you would comfort a scared child, you learn to understand your scared mind. You don't worship its fears, but you don't punish it for having them either. You observe the patterns and you train new ones. Slowly, through consistent awareness, the old conditioning weakens. A mind that is understood becomes quieter. A mind that is judged becomes louder. When you approach your mental attacks with awareness instead of resistance, the attacks lose their sharpness. You begin to see the thought as a habit, not a prophecy. You begin to see the fear as memory, not intuition. You begin to see the insecurity as conditioning, not reality. This clarity is the beginning of true freedom. And here is the most important conclusion. You are not fighting the mind. You are retraining it. Understanding your conditioning is the first step toward liberation from it. Once you see the causes of your mental attacks, you no longer feel powerless in front of them. You see the mechanics, you see the patterns. You know that what was learned can be unlearned, and that changes everything. 5. Why the mind attacks. Your mind doesn't attack you because it is evil. It doesn't attack you because there's something wrong with you. It attacks because the mind is a machine built out of conditioning, a mixture of your environment, your past experiences, your fears, your memories, your habits, and the emotional patterns you've rehearsed for years. The mind works the way it was trained to work, whether that training was intentional or accidental, and most people's training was accidental. If you grew up around anxious people, your mind learned anxiety. If you grew up around criticism, your mind learned self-criticism. If you were taught to expect disappointment, your mind learned to prepare for the worst. If you were punished for mistakes, your mind learned to fear failure. If you went through instability, the mind learned hypervigilance. None of this was a conscious choice. The mind simply adapted to survive. But now those survival adaptations appear as intrusive thoughts, panic, self-doubt, and emotional storms. This is why the mind's attacks feel so personal, because they were shaped by deeply personal experiences. But the truth is the opposite. The attacks are not personal. They're just patterns running on autopilot. A thought like, "You're going to fail," doesn't arise because it knows anything about your future. It arises because your mind has repeatedly associated fear with uncertainty. So when uncertainty appears, your mind pulls out the old memory, fear. Not because it's true, because it's familiar. A thought like, "You're not good enough," doesn't come from awareness. It comes from the internalized voices of people who planted doubt in you long before you could protect yourself. The mind stored those voices and now repeats them without understanding the damage they caused. A thought like, "Something bad will happen," doesn't come from intuition. It comes from a mind trained to anticipate danger. That pattern may have protected you before, but now it traps you. The mind attacks using the material it has, and for most people that material is unprocessed pain. Buddhism explains this through the law of karma, not in the mystical sense but in the psychological sense. Whatever you repeat becomes a habit, and whatever becomes a habit becomes your automatic response. Karma here means conditioned momentum. If your mind has been fed fear, insecurity, and self-judgment for years, then of course it reacts with fear, insecurity, and self-judgment whenever it faces stress. It's doing exactly what it was programmed to do. Once you understand this, the shame disappears. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and you start asking the real question, "What shaped this pattern in me?" That question leads to clarity instead of guilt, awareness instead of panic. Here's the deeper truth. Thoughts are not random. They arise from causes. Buddhism calls these causes seeds or imprints. Every experience, especially emotional ones, leaves a mark on the mind. Those marks influence how the mind reacts in the future. If you don't understand these imprints, the mind feels chaotic. But once you do understand them, its behavior makes complete sense. A mind filled with old pain will produce painful thoughts. A mind filled with fear will produce frightening thoughts. A mind filled with self-blame will produce self-critical thoughts. A mind filled with attachment will produce anxious thoughts. A mind filled with unresolved memories will produce intrusive thoughts. Not because the mind is against you, but because the mind is predictable. You can't expect a mind conditioned by suffering to suddenly produce confidence and peace. That's unrealistic. But here's where Buddhism gives hope. Conditioning is not permanent. The mind is flexible. Its habits can change. Its patterns can be retrained. You might not control the first thought your mind produces, the automatic one, but you absolutely can train what comes after it. You can learn to recognize it as conditioning instead of truth. You can choose not to obey it. You can soften its influence by staying grounded in awareness. You can weaken the old patterns by refusing to feed them with your attention. People misunderstand healing. They think healing means erasing all painful thoughts. But healing in Buddhism means understanding the origin of the painful thoughts so deeply that they no longer control you. You don't need a silent mind. You need a trained mind. A trained mind sees the thought, "I'm not enough," and says, "This is a memory speaking, not me." A trained mind hears everything will go wrong and recognizes, "This is fear, not reality." A trained mind feels a surge of anxiety and knows, "This is conditioning rising to the surface so it can leave." Healing is not the end of storms. Healing is learning that the storms do not define you. Here's another layer people avoid acknowledging. Some of the mind's attacks come from emotional injuries that were never properly felt. Suppressed experiences don't disappear, they hide underground. And when life becomes quiet, the mind pulls them back up, not to punish you, but to release them. Most of what feels like an attack is actually the mind trying to resolve what has been stored for too long. This is why Buddhist practice emphasizes compassion, not toward others first, but toward yourself. Compassion dissolves resistance. Resistance strengthens conditioning. If you treat your mind like an enemy, you energize the very patterns that hurt you. But if you understand your mind as a scared system doing the best it can with the pain it carries, the attack loses its violence. You see the wound instead of the weapon. When you reach this point of understanding, the mind's attacks feel different. They're still uncomfortable, but they're not authoritative. They're not convincing. They're not overwhelming. You see their cause, their pattern, their conditioning. And once you understand the cause, the effect loses its power. This is the beginning of liberation. You go from being a victim of your thoughts to being the witness of them. You see the mechanics, you see the conditioning, you see the pattern repeating. And with that awareness, something inside you quietly says, "This is not me. This is just the mind doing what it was taught." The moment you see that clearly, the attack dissolves. 6. The practice of returning. When a painful thought rises, most people panic. They try to argue with it, outrun it, bury it, or replace it with something positive. But all of those reactions strengthen the thought. They confirm it. They tell your mind, "This is important." The mind interprets your reaction as attention, and whatever you give attention to grows. The Buddhist approach is brutally simple. When a painful thought appears, you return. Return to your breath. Return to your body. Return to awareness. You don't run from the thought, and you don't run toward it. You let it be there without feeding it. You stand still while the thought passes like a wave. You don't surf it, you don't drown in it, you don't chase it. You let the wave rise, peak, and fall, exactly as nature designed it to. And here's the truth most people never learn. Every thought has a natural lifespan. Every emotion has a rise and fall. The problem isn't the thought. The problem is the interference. Your mind brings a thought, and instead of letting it finish its natural cycle, you jump in with fear, judgment, or interpretation. That interruption traps the thought in your system. The mind tries to complete what was never allowed to complete. That's why the same painful thought returns again and again, not because it's meaningful, but because you never let it finish. Returning to the breath breaks this cycle. It redirects your attention from the content of the mind to the present reality of the body. Breath is neutral, stable, immediate. It doesn't judge. It doesn't react. When you shift your awareness onto the breath, the mind loses its fuel. The thought may remain for a moment, but without your attention, it fades. Its emotional charge dissolves. People underestimate the simplicity of this. They think returning to the breath is too basic. But the mind doesn't need complexity, it needs stability. The breath anchors you in the now, where thoughts have no real substance. When you're aware of breathing, a thought loses its ability to convince you that it's the center of your reality. The next step is to feel your body. Not analyze it, feel it. Notice the weight of your hands, the temperature of your skin, the tension in your chest, the movement of your abdomen with each inhale and exhale. These sensations bring you out of the story the mind is telling and into the truth of the present moment. The story is conceptual. The body is real. The mind can lie. The direct experience of the body cannot. When a thought says, "You're failing," the body remains exactly as it was a moment ago. When a thought whispers, "Everything will go wrong," nothing in your physical environment actually changes. The thought trembles, but reality stays still. That contrast is grounding. It weakens the illusion the mind is trying to create. Returning is not escaping. It's choosing clarity instead of reaction. Buddhism does not tell you to replace negative thoughts with positive ones. That's just another layer of struggle. Buddhism trains you to see each thought as a passing event, not a command. When a thought attacks, "You're not enough, you'll never change, something terrible will happen," the practice is not to debate it, but to recognize it. This is a thought arising due to conditioning. Then return to the breath, return to the body, return to awareness. A crucial detail: returning doesn't mean the thought disappears instantly. This is where most people misunderstand the practice. Returning means you stop feeding the thought. You stop supplying it with emotional energy, fear, or attention. Without that energy, the thought weakens, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but always inevitably. Every thought, no matter how powerful it feels, is temporary. It cannot survive without your involvement. You don't have to push it away. Its nature is to leave. All you must do is not follow it. When you return to the breath again and again, you retrain the mind. You build a new habit: awareness first, reaction second. You create a gap between the appearance of a thought and your response to it. That gap is the beginning of freedom. Inside that gap, the thought loses its ability to drag you around. This is why Buddhist teachers emphasize the phrase, "Observe the thought, do not become the thought." Returning is the practical method of staying the observer. You remain the sky. The thought remains the cloud. The emotional storms still arise, but they don't dictate your actions. They don't paralyze your body. They don't control your mood. They come and go like weather changes, while you remain grounded in the present moment. The more you practice returning, the more you discover something profound. The mind becomes quieter not through force, but through non-engagement. A mind that is not constantly wrestled with begins to rest on its own. It settles naturally, not perfectly, not in a way that removes all thoughts, but in a way that removes their authority over you. And this is the real meaning of freedom in Buddhism, not the elimination of thoughts, but the mastery of attention. Not the end of mental storms, but the ability to remain untouched by them. When you can return with ease, the old patterns lose their power. Anxiety loses its grip. Intrusive thoughts lose their shock. Self-critical thoughts lose their sting. Because the moment you return, you are no longer inside the thought. You are the awareness watching it rise and fall, and nothing that rises and falls can control you. This is the path. This is the training. And if you continue it, the mind will eventually stop attacking with the intensity it once had. Not because the mind has changed its nature, but because you have changed your relationship to it. 7. The freedom beyond thought. True Buddhist happiness is not the absence of mental attacks. It's not a life where the mind never produces fear, doubt, or sadness. It's not about creating some ideal version of yourself with perfect thoughts and flawless emotions. That fantasy collapses the moment real life shows up. The mind will always produce thoughts. The nervous system will always produce sensations. Old conditioning will occasionally echo. You cannot stop the waves, but you can stop drowning in them. Freedom comes when you understand that thoughts have no final authority. They appear, they speak, they dissolve. They are events, not laws, appearances, not identities, movements, not facts. When you stop believing every thought, the mind loses its ability to hurt you. A thought can be sharp, loud, or dark, but if you see clearly that this is only a thought, its power evaporates. This is the moment everything shifts. When you stop reacting to thoughts as if they define you, the storm becomes background noise. The awareness beneath the storm becomes your home. That awareness, the silent space in which every thought arises and falls, is untouched by whatever the thought says. It remains stable even when the mind is chaotic. It remains clear even when the mind is noisy. It remains whole even when the heart feels broken. The mistake humans make is identifying with whatever the mind produces. If the mind produces sadness, they say, "I am sad." If the mind produces fear, they say, "I am afraid." If the mind produces insecurity, they say, "I am not enough." But none of these statements are accurate. The correct statement is, sadness is arising, fear is arising, insecurity is arising. You are not the thought. You are the awareness noticing it. This shift seems small, but it completely rewires your relationship with the mind. Identification binds you. Observation frees you. Once you see that your thoughts are not you, you stop negotiating with them. You stop trying to explain yourself to them. You stop giving them the power to decide your emotional state. They lose their authority. They lose their believability. And without belief, thoughts collapse. A thought without belief is just noise, a passing whisper with no weight. This is why Buddhist teachings always return to the idea of non-attachment. Non-attachment is not coldness. It's not emotional numbness. It's the clarity of seeing the true nature of experience. Nothing you feel or think is permanent, and nothing that arises in the mind is you. When you stop clinging, suffering falls apart. When you stop resisting, peace emerges naturally. Peace is not something you create. It's something you uncover. It's already there under the storm. Thoughts only cover it, like clouds covering the sky. When the clouds move, the sky wasn't created. It was revealed. Awareness is the same. When thoughts settle, you reconnect with a deeper stillness that has been with you the entire time. And here's the irony. Once you stop being scared of thoughts, the thoughts themselves become gentler. When you stop treating them like threats, they stop behaving like threats. They arise, they pass, and they lose interest in disturbing you. A mind that is no longer resisted begins to relax. It stops panicking. It stops echoing old fears so loudly. It stops attacking with the same intensity. Your relationship with your mind becomes one of understanding, not conflict. You stop being the victim in a mental battlefield. You become the witness, steady and unmoved. You let thoughts come and go without letting them drag you into stories, fears, or imaginary catastrophes. You live in the present instead of living in mental projections. And you discover something profound. The mind cannot imprison you when you stop arguing with it. Freedom does not mean the mind stops producing thoughts. Freedom means the thoughts stop controlling you. Freedom means you can feel fear without collapsing into it. You can feel sadness without becoming it. You can feel uncertainty without losing your center. You can watch every thought rise and fall without being dragged into its gravity. This is the happiness Buddhism points to. Not a happiness built on perfect circumstances, but a happiness built on understanding. A happiness that comes from seeing reality as it is, not as your fears distort it. A happiness that doesn't depend on your mind behaving a certain way. A happiness that remains even when the mind produces storms. Your thoughts will attack again. That is their nature. But you are no longer obligated to follow them. You are no longer powerless in front of them. You can watch them rise. You can watch them fall. You remain free. And that freedom, the freedom to witness without becoming, is the most unshakable happiness a human being can experience. Your mind will create more thoughts tomorrow. Some will be gentle, some will be sharp, and some will try to drag you back into old patterns. But now you understand something most people never realize. Thoughts are events, not commands. They don't define you, they don't control you, they don't determine your destiny. You can't stop the mind from producing clouds, but you can stop mistaking clouds for the sky. This is the beginning of real freedom, not the end of thoughts, but the end of being ruled by them. The storms may still come, but they don't own you anymore. They rise, they fall, and you remain steady, aware, and untouched. Carry this understanding into your day. Let every painful thought remind you not of your weakness, but of your training. Let every emotional storm remind you of the sky behind it. And let every moment of awareness become a step toward the peace that has always been waiting beneath the noise. The mind will whisper, but you no longer have to listen.